Today I want to talk about the work realities of professional studio musicians in Germany, and I will be talking about the skills that they need, also what they do in their everyday life, but I will concentrate mostly on the economic situation because this is one very important, interesting aspect here. But before I go into detail, I want to start with a short teaser, which is a snippet of the movie Hired Guns, that maybe some of you have seen already, because it introduces the topic quite nicely.
Everybody in my band's an A-list player. I just don't have time for B-list guys.
Hired Gun is the best available musician. Nobody will know who he is, but he gets the gig because he's the elite player.
I have the most brilliant, wonderful, best ever band. Give him a hand!
As a hired gun, quote unquote, I'm there to be a supportive band member, to the artist, to the other musicians, to the audience.
Yeah, if you're interested in this kind of topic, then you might know some of these sources. There have been a couple of books and documentaries on this topic, but generally, especially also in academia, quite a little is known actually about studio musicians. So it's a rather understudied topic, and it is also often a well-kept secret in the industry. So nobody really talks about what the work is like, what they are paid, and all of these things. When you look into older media, then you
Everybody in my band's an
more condescending or unfavorable descriptions of studio musicians like interchangeable laborers or hired guns or musical mercenaries, which is not doing justice to the creative ideas that they contribute to popular music in so many genres. Today, with all the changes in the industry, the future of this profession seems to be uncertain, I think. We have got decreasing budgets in the recording industry, we've got the closing of major studios, the rise of home studio-based producers, and decentralized network collaborations. And in the light of these changes, I want to explore the work realities of studio musicians in Germany, which is the third largest music industry in the world with a yearly turnover of 11 billion euros. So it's quite different to the Anglo-American one, but it's also a major market, so it's important to study those. The research questions were: what are the working practices of the studio musicians like? How is their economic situation? And how is it affected by the changes in the recording industry? Methodically, I've interviewed 6 of the leading session musicians in Germany. One of them, the bass player, for example, used to play or work with Giorgio Moroder in Munich in the 70s and went with him to LA. So I've interviewed one of the main, or several of the main studio musicians in the German scene. I only want to cover this briefly. How do they prepare a recording session? And what is quite surprising about it was to me is that many of the musicians don't actually practice when they prepare for a session, or they don't practice at all, which is quite counterintuitive, but they just don't have the time to do so. The oldest musician, the one I talked to you about before, who went to work with Giorgio Moroder, he said he has never practiced any scales or techniques in his over 40 years of professional musician, which is quite interesting, I think. When they practice, or kind of practice, then they will they develop ideas or they work on technical skills. For example, they try to recreate sounds they heard on albums and try to come up with new sounds rather than do technical exercises. They also don't usually get sheet music to prepare, but they improvise on the spot when they go to the session. And even if, another problem is that many of the songs are not even composed when they enter the studio, so they cannot really prepare. So what they do sometimes is to get acquainted with the artist and what their sounds are and get some ideas before, but they don't learn any songs in advance. All of them have their own project studio, and the most normal way of recording nowadays is at home, where they just get sent production material by the producer and add their own performances there. There are, of course, several advantages to this. Of course, the first one is the lower costs, because you don't have to book an expensive studio, and you also have less cost for personnel, because you just engineer yourself, and then you don't have to book an engineer, and this might raise the fees that the musicians can take. Also, one of the respondents said that if they didn't have a project studio on their own, they would lose at least 50% of their jobs. So it's very essential to have one nowadays, at least for all of the 6 ones I've worked with. Other advantages are there are much more flexible work schedules, because they often record for TV stars or with TV stars, and they never really meet them and don't meet the producer. It's all done over the phone or by text message or email. So it's much more flexible this way. Also, you save money for transport and time. And when you see how much they earn, you will see that this is a necessary approach to this. As you could expect, all of the musicians still would prefer to record in a big recording studio together with a band. They prefer live recordings for different reasons, because musicians usually do, but also they feel that the pressure is less when you record in a group than when you are recording with an overdubbed approach. So all of them are engineering themselves, and sometimes they perform different roles at the same time, but some of them refuse to do because they have to compromise, because they can concentrate on different roles, and they fear their reputation would suffer, so they refuse to be an engineer, the musician, the producer at the same time, and really differentiate between the roles. Another reason why they want to record in a professional recording studio is that they still value the interaction with the producer, because if you don't have finished songs, then you need some feedback. And this is one quote I got here. I prefer working with the employer, because when you watch his reactions or talk to him, you find out what he needs faster, and then you come to an agreement quicker. If you're working in isolation, then there's often a huge difference between what you think is needed and the reality. So it can pay off just to go to the studio, because you might get the result quicker than just sending over many versions over and over again. Also, they think that this will lead to better results, because if you work together with another person, they would convince you to go for the unconventional approach, which you wouldn't do if you record on your own. Let's move on to the economic situation. All of them agreed that it is not possible anymore to live just from studio work in Germany, as it used to be possible in the 70s and 80s. And so each participant is forced to have several sources of income, which range from being a live musician, playing in original bands, being a composer for library content and audio plays, being an arranger for other projects, or being a producer and teacher in music schools and in higher education. All of them are paid pretty much the same way for their services. They rarely receive royalties from the lucrative GEMA, which is the German Society for Music Performing and Mechanical Reproduction Rights, which is a big problem, as was criticized. And here I put a quote. As a matter of fact, studio musicians had to be credited for their compositional work, but if you insisted on your share, this would have been the last job that you did for the producer, which I think stands on its own. Although they all believe they should be paid fairly, none of them goes for this because they fear they would not be employed anymore. Also, another consequence is if they insisted on their rights, and the producers and composers and arrangers would fear them to come up with good ideas, and this would affect their revenue. Instead, the musicians can get money from the GBL, which is the Collecting Society for Neighboring Rights. They usually just get a few cents for each record, but if it's a successful record, then they still get some money, which some of them are quite fond of. Some of the employees could even be quite deceitful, as the oldest participant, the bass player, said. He was often requested to compose during the session, and he's he said he was okay to do so, to develop rhythmic groups, for example, but actually composing something or arranging the piece in a different way would be something different, because it would involve performing a different role, which would fall under different collecting societies. So this is quite a difficult situation to be put in for them. Still, he said he has composed for free just because he wants to keep this good working relationship with the employer. Also, and this is quite interesting maybe to those of you who are acquainted with the UK scene, there are no musicians' unions in Germany that protect the rights of the musicians. So they usually get fees for their work, like session fees, and all of the musicians said that they haven't been raised since at least for at least 20 years, so they're still the same. The most acclaimed respondent, who is a professor of music production and guitar performance at 2 universities, shed some light into the paying practice in the past. And studio musicians used to get a fixed rate for a song, and then they got additionally 50% for every other instrument they played. And I think this was a common rule everywhere in the world, pretty much. So business-minded guitarists, for example, tried to add overdubs with different instruments, so they could have earned 1,600 D-Mark, so it's about the same as in Europe in the 70s and 80s for a song, which is quite okay. And for good employers, they would have gotten money for transport and accommodation, and even without playing different instruments, they could easily earn 1,500 euro or then D-Mark per song. But this luxury is now long gone, and the usual rates are around 100 euro per song, which is really not much. Also, they still record other instruments and sing, but they don't get any extra money for this. Other things have tightened the business. There are more higher education programs, so there's more competition in music performance and production. Then, of course, there are technological changes. Computer instruments are much more powerful, have better quality, and so many musicians were forced to look for another occupation in the 90s, and yeah, it has been quite, or the challenge musicians face is to show what they can offer, what a computer instrument cannot provide. This is mainly providing ideas and sounds and character. Yeah, and then of course there are semi-professional musicians, engineers, and producers that offer services for little money, so there's a lot of competition in the semi-professional realm. And illegal music downloads and streaming services are other things that have tightened the business. So if we look at the literature, we find quite a diverse picture, especially in the USA. This is an older one by Pierce. This is a text that was exactly 20 years ago, and it says most of them work 6 days a week, playing 2 sessions a day. Session musicians are always booked and must be hired several months in advance to play on a session. However, they no longer have to go out on the road. Also, in the book on the music industry by Field, she said that there would be a gross annual income of $100,000 per year for every studio musician. So, as you can expect, this is not really true anymore, at least not in the German recording industry. So they usually have to do live music and teaching, which are vital sources of income. And this also complies with official statistics showing that more than half of the freelancing musicians have another occupation, or at least different work in different areas in music. The number of studio jobs has decreased since the 90s, and also there were falling rates, as I've already said. And this situation occurs with William Streesen's account of the US American studio scene, according to which studio musicians suffer from financial insecurity, extensive preparation, and from the high demands on musical skills. Also, there's a study on the Australian music scene, and this shares the same light. And all of these studies agree that the main problem is that the musicians don't get access to the royalties that are associated with the compositional labor. So they only get the mechanical rights, but not the creative rights, which is the main thing. So they don't get access to the GEMA, but nobody really takes actions because they want to keep employable. So I said before that there are no musicians' unions in Germany. This is partly true. There is in theory the GBL, which wants to protect the rights of performing artists. This is their statute here, but in reality they don't really do this, or at least it's not working. And I think it's quite important to think about the question of authorship in this context of hired services in music, because it remains debatable what services employers can expect when they hire a musician. So, for example, playing skills, I think everybody would agree, is something that you can expect, but when and stylistic knowledge as well. But when it comes to composition, then this becomes quite blurry. So this is something to take into account, and more importantly, you have to be aware of national regulations which are different in Germany than in the Anglo-American world, because here, for example, you've got the copyright, which is the right to copy. In Germany and in France and other countries around Germany, there's the so-called Urheberrecht, or the author's rights. And the author's rights secure the artistic and economic rights of creators. And so the author can grant permission to copy the work, but they can never lose their author's rights, which are inextricably tied to the exploitation rights. So there's a different regulation than in the UK. And the threshold, actually, which is called the small coin, is very low. So pretty much everything should be a protectable merit legally. But it has to be decided on a case-by-case basis, because there are no strict regulations for this. And this makes it really hard, because you would have to go to court to prove that you are a composer. But then again, there's the issue of the competition. If you would do this as a musician, then you would not get hired again. So this is a big problem here. So as a result, the musicians don't get access to the GEMA, and as you can see here, the GEMA has much larger budget than the GBL, and half of it goes to the record labels, so only half of it goes to the musicians. If you look at the average income, you see that composers and writers are remunerated much better than musicians, and producers are paid best. You can see that producers don't get many royalties, even less than musicians, but they've got more fees, and so they are not really that affected by this as musicians are. When we look at the budgets, we see that the live music scene and the recorded music scene are about the same size, but I think it's safe to assume that the recorded music industry employs fewer people, so there is some budget available, but it does not go to the musicians. So this is a big problem. And the same if we go here, and we see that theoretically the recording industry is not that bad. But still, the money does not go to the musicians. So other research has shown even for producers that are working internationally, it is really hard to earn enough money to live from your music professionally in Germany as a musician and as a producer. And this, I think, complies with many other places in the world when you read the literature. Despite all this, the musicians are quite content with their situation, because they like to perform different genres of music, they like to play with other people, and they really like that people enjoy listening to their music, even though they don't know that they have played on this, and it doesn't really matter to them. All of them agreed to this. And they are grateful just to make a living from being a musician. 20 years ago, Strappert has predicted the decline of the professional studio musician. He wrote, "The job has become obsolete, everything is computerized, we're heading towards a future where machines are entertaining us." I think the findings support this negative outlook, but it's not that drastic, I think not, at least not yet. What is more important, I think, is that the skill sets are changing. Just being a musician is not sufficient anymore, and I think this complies with higher education practices that many of the popular musicians also are trained in technology, because you need to be able to engineer yourself, you need all these skills. And if you are able to do this, then I think you're really competitive and have a chance to make a living like this. Thank you.
I wondered if the musicians that you talk to, and you are talking to, how varied their practice is. I guess stylistically, whether they're the kind of hired guns, quote unquote, that do one thing really well, they're always hired back to do that, or potentially versatility is
I think versatility is of course important, but they refrain from certain genres that require a lot of practicing. So only one of them would play heavy metal or any kind of metal music, because they would have to practice all the technique. They wouldn't play flamenco, for example, but they play lots of Schlager or folk music, everything single pop music, where they just get templates, and I expect to play something like that. Most of it is just playing simple things, but it's essential to know, for example, for guitar players, to know the fretboard, to know inversions on the fretboard. So the basics are really important, but nothing very special. They would play this.
And do they tend to be multi-instrumentalists, or the guitar players, just guitar players, not just the bass players?
Usually they only play one instrument that well, but they play some other instruments sometimes, but not at the same level.
Thanks for that. The one bit I wasn't sure about is you were talking about compositional rights in relation to performers and musicians, but what about their neighbouring rights, or various names for recording rights, performance rights, and so on?
Yeah.
Because in EU law, 50% of those royalties are supposed to go to musicians. Then it's down to territory how much that's divided between session musicians and featured artists. Do you know what the situation there is?
No, but I can tell you that only the most experienced one, the bass player, said that he earns some money from the neighboring rights. For the others, it's not really consideration. So they usually get the one-off fee, and then they're gone.
Because if it is, I don't know what the German equivalent of PPL here is, but it's worth looking at. It's obviously a growing area of rights. If they've got a set percentage in their rules, it might be something that a lot of German musicians are missing out on.
I think a lot of things are changing right now, so we're in a time where things are changing. I think also with streaming services, there have to be new kind of regulations.
Like streaming, unfortunately, that misses out on those royalties.
I'm interested in the transition to being more technologically savvy. So some of the musicians that you spoke to have a really long career. How have they found that transition? How have people invested in a home studio? Was that something that they've done for the love of it, or that have they seen the writing on the wall? How had that worked?
I think it's an economic requirement nowadays. So the older ones, of course, they grew up in the big studios, and they think it's still a benefit to have experienced those days, because there are these younger producers who have grown up only in the digital world, but having knowledge of analog signal flow, for example, is like something that makes them competitive. And there's a quite interesting psychology that they kind of control the whole recording situation because they want it to be efficient. But this doesn't answer the question. I think just with technological advancement, technology became more affordable, and they realized that less and less big projects, or there were less and less big projects for this kind of work, so it would just be more competitive to have a studio.
So were they able to get like tax breaks to do that as part of their business?
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.